What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch back here with another NFL record prediction for the 2020 regular season. In this video, I'm going to dive into the Green Bay Packers 2020 schedule and give you my record prediction for Green Bay in 2020. Before I give you the Packers record for this season and determine whether or not they will win the NFC North, once again, Gronk, spike the like button, subscribe to the Bottom Line View for more NFL videos just like this, and comment below your opinion. Let me know, Packers fans, what you think. How do you think the Packers will do in 2020? Let's take a look at this difficult, much more difficult schedule this year as opposed to last year, where a lot of people were calling the Packers the worst 2 seed in the history of the NFC. And, maybe that's a little unfair because you can only play who's on your schedule. But at a certain point, playing the Chiefs without Patrick Mahomes, and basically the only good team on your schedule last year was Minnesota, who's in your own division, who you always beat. I mean, at a certain point, it kind of gets comedic. This year, it's a lot more difficult. When you look at it on paper, you play in New Orleans, you play, of course, the Vikings twice, and you probably will play Matt Stafford twice this year. He didn't play last year. You play Tampa Bay and Tampa Bay. You play Deshaun Watson. You play San Francisco and San Francisco again. You play the Colts. You play the Eagles. And the Titans. So there's a lot more on the schedule that you have to digest and take into account. So let's go and start with week number 1. So the Packers play in Minnesota. The Packers have dominated the Vikings in this rivalry, for a long time. I mean, it just seems like the Packers have the upper hand really on the entire NFC North for the most part since Rodgers has been the quarterback. Like, they've rarely lost within the division, and that's what's allowed them to be the consistent playoff team that they've been. This year, I do think the Vikings are the more talented roster, but I don't necessarily know if the Vikings are better. Like, it's hard to really digest and determine to me. I think the Packers will be more ready week 1. So I'm going to give them the win. Here's why. The Vikings are a very young team, very young roster. They drafted a lot of players that will be played in crucial positions. And I think when you're doing that in week 1 and you're having to teach, especially this offseason, having to teach all these guys systems and things, that's going to hurt the Vikings. And I understand the Vikings are great at home, but when you really think about it, the Green Bay Packers have the upper hand on the Vikings. And then the second thing, all these young players, Aaron Rodgers, especially in the secondary, Aaron Rodgers should be able to take advantage. So I'm going to say they win week 1. Now, for all the Green Bay Packer fans out there to completely hate me, I am going to pick the Lions in week 2. Now, you should know this if you're a Packers fan. The Detroit Lions have, in the last 6 games, they are 4-2 versus the Packers. In one of those games that they did win, the Packers, they played no Matt Stafford. I don't know who the quarterback was for Detroit, but they only managed to win by like 1 or 2 points. I think it was week 17 of last year, which was still an important game, or late in the season last year, and Green Bay just barely won with the last-second field goal. And in the first week that they played them, it was the Trey Flowers fiasco with multiple dumb calls by the refs, which allowed them to win. So in the 2 games that the Packers have beat the Lions, it's been by the skin of their teeth in very, very close games. But in the other 4, the Lions basically dominated those games in victories. So it just seems like Matt Patricia, for whatever reason, has the upper hand on the Packers. Not that he has an upper hand on many other teams, but that just seems to be the case. In week 3, New Orleans and New Orleans. I'm going to say the Saints win. Okay, Drew Brees, New Orleans and New Orleans. Not a lot to say. Sean Payton, great coach. I think this is one of the games where you're out-coached here. And New Orleans, I think they have not the greatest secondary in the world, but they have Marshawn Lattimore, who When you look at the Packers, you only really need one good corner versus the Packers because they don't have any other receivers besides Devontae Adams. Their D-line is good enough to slow down the run, which the Saints have been one of the better run defending teams in the past couple of years. And then on the opposite side, it's going to be difficult for the Packers to contain all that the Saints can throw at them and the awesome scheme of Sean Payton. So I'm going to go with the Saints at home. That game is on Sunday night. Week 4, they play Atlanta. This game's kind of a back and forth one for me because Atlanta has given the Packers issues under Dan Quinn in recent seasons because of their speed defensively. So for that reason, I'm going to say Atlanta finds a way to go into Lambeau and win, although I'm not confident about it, which would mean that the Packers going into their bye are 1-3. And then coming out of it, they have to face Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. Yeah. You know what? I honestly can't say they're going to be 1-3 going into the bye. Even though Atlanta gives them a lot of issues, man. This is actually making me think. Okay, I'm going to say, let's just say Rodgers. Okay, I actually didn't think about this. But Rodgers versus that secondary of Atlanta has to be concerning if you're a Falcons fan, right? Has to be concerning because Atlanta's secondary is not very good. So because of that, I'll give it to Green Bay. And they don't have any corners to cover Devontae Adams. So I'll say the Packers win. Man, I almost said 1-3 going to the bye. But I do think they're going to lose to Tom Brady in Tampa Bay. I think the Bucs are just a much better team. Like, much more talented. I don't think the Packers really have any area, maybe outside corner, where they're better. Like, the Bucs have an elite front seven, elite weapons, elite coaching. They have Tom now. They have, excuse my dogs in the background. They have elite linebackers. Just about everywhere you look, the Bucs are more talented, and they're at home, and they have Tom Brady now. And this is Tom Brady versus Aaron Rodgers. So you have to figure that the Bucs teammates are going to get up for that and really want to play. And so will the Packers teammates. Week 7, Green Bay at Houston. Houston, this is a challenging game because it's Deshaun Watson. I do think, though, when you really take into account, the matchup, I think the Packers are better at stopping what Houston is good at than Houston stopping what Green Bay is good at. So I think for that reason, I'm going to go with the Packers. I think the Packers can get just enough pressure. They have just enough cover guys to slow down the Texans, while the Texans, they don't have the cover guys. They don't really have the pass rush to slow down Aaron Rodgers. So in an Aaron Rodgers versus Deshaun Watson matchup, Watson has more to overcome than Rodgers. Week 8, they play the Vikings. I think they'll lose one game to the Vikings this year. I can't see them sweeping them this year. I just, at this point in Week 8, too, those rookies will be a little bit more refined, a little bit more experience in their game. So I'm going to say the Vikings win Week 8. Week 9, this is a Thursday night game versus San Francisco, and I can't say they can beat San Francisco. I saw it twice last year, and it wasn't even a contest. It was like the high school team playing, in the NFL. It was just embarrassing how bad that matchup was twice. It seemed like LaFleur had no answers for Kyle Shanahan, and the 49ers did whatever they wanted on the ground. Week 10, they play the Jags at home. I think they beat the Jags at home. Week 11, they play the Colts. I'm actually going to go with the Colts here, okay? And they're 4-6 at this point, which is pretty depressing. But when you look at the Colts, they're another team like San Francisco with a really good coaching staff who I believe they can run the ball. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league, and I don't think the Packers have done enough to really make their run defense any better. Week 12, they've dominated the Bears rivalry. They will beat the Bears in Green Bay. Week 13, they play the Eagles. This is a back-and-forth contest. The Eagles went to Lambeau and beat them last year, so I could see the Eagles winning this game, but I'm going to say that the Packers end up winning this one. Week 14, they play the Lions. Okay, so this is really where it comes down to me. They play the Eagles week 13, the Lions week 14. If they lose to the Lions, I think they beat the if they lose to the Lions, they beat the Eagles. If they lose to the Eagles, they beat the Lions. Got to put that in proper English. Week 14, I think they're going to get swept by the Lions. Okay, they got swept, I think it was 2 years ago. So again, look at the proof on the table, guys. Maybe they win one game versus the Lions, okay? But if they win one game, I don't think it really changes much. You know, there's some games here where I've given them wins where they easily could have lost. Like, just don't take the actual game into perspective. If they get swept by the Lions, okay, they could still lose to Atlanta. They could still lose to Houston, okay? Really, when you look at the schedule, is there a really winnable game outside of playing Chicago at home? Outside of that, from week 1, and Jacksonville, from week 1 to week 14, the Packers do not play a game where I think they will win 100% outside of 2 games versus the Bears and the Jags. The other games, they play Minnesota twice, New Orleans in New Orleans. They play the Lions, who I've said many times they've struggled with. They play the Colts in Indianapolis. They play the Eagles at home. They play Atlanta, who they've struggled with, at home. They play the Bucks in Tampa Bay. They play Houston in Houston. And they play San Francisco on Thursday in San Francisco. That is tough. Okay, week 15, they'll beat Carolina. Week 16 and 17. Okay, I think they beat Chicago. They'll sweep Chicago. And they will lose to Tennessee. And the reason they'll lose to Tennessee is the same reason they'll lose to the Colts and the 49ers. They cannot stop the run. Period. End of story. And when you look at what Mike Vrabel brings to the table defensively, it's a lot like what Detroit does. So, yeah, it might seem a little crazy when you just say 8-8, the Packers. But when you really break down the schedule and game by game, it's not unreasonable for me to say that the Packers will be 8-8. I could see them being as good as 10-6 and as bad as 7-9. As bad as 7-9, as good as 10-6. That's the way I see the Packers this year. I think if they make the playoffs, they just squeak in. Maybe they win the division. I think 8-8, like 8-8 is not going to be too far off from the leader in the division this year. That's the way I look at it. So, yeah, might be shocking to you Packers fans, but that's the way I see it. I just don't see the team. I think they were much better last year in terms of their record than actually how good they were. They won a lot of one-score games. They played a very weak schedule. They were very fortunate with injuries, and they haven't really made their weaknesses any better. And I think teams are going to expose that. So there you go. 8-8 for the Packers. If you enjoyed, Gronk, spike the like button, subscribe to The Bottom Line View for more NFL. It's Mitch. Peace.